You're listening to LeaderCast, episode 167. Welcome to LeaderCast, Transforming Missions podcast with Tim Bias and Sara Thomas, providing you with insights and resources you need to lead a movement of Jesus followers.
167 episodes, Sara.
It's crazy.
Yeah, we started this year, this 2021 year, looking at different aspects of courageous leadership. January, we looked at purpose, and last month, February, we were with relationships. And another very important area of leadership, and especially courageous leadership, is self-awareness. I feel kind of tentative even talking about self-awareness.
Are you self-conscious?
Well, no, I'm not.
So we're going to get into that in just a minute. Let me remind you before we jump into this episode on self-awareness that you can find show notes for this episode on the podcast page at transformingmission.org/podcast. And we haven't asked this of you in a while, so let me ask you today. And this might be an awkward one to do it with, so you might want to, well, no, maybe it's not an awkward one to do it with. How about I just give you the invitation? This is what I want to ask you to do. Is there someone, as you listen to this episode, or maybe it was a previous episode, that you thought of and you wish that they listened to it too? Would you share it with them? Whether it's this episode or a previous episode, just invite someone to listen to LeaderCast with you, and perhaps it will help you in what we talked about all last month, building the relationships that you want to have with people. So, Tim, you were saying about getting defensive?
I'm not defensive, Sara.
Oh, goodness. So, I think where we want to start today is simply by having a conversation around what is self-awareness. And Tim, I've said to you, I hear us toss that us, and that's a global us, toss that word self-awareness around. Usually it's in a negative way. That person lacks self-awareness. And we're really talking about something specific, but we don't name that specific aspect of self-awareness, let alone take the step to actually have a conversation with someone about what we're noticing either in their growth or an area that they need to grow in terms of self-awareness. So as leaders, this both applies to you as a leader and to the people that you're leading and helping them to grow in their self-awareness. So we've got 5 different aspects of self-awareness that we want to talk with you about today and give you a couple of examples. And hopefully that will set you up to listen to the conversations that we have throughout the rest of this month with others sharing their wisdom and knowledge around self-awareness. So Tim, what's the first aspect of self-awareness?
Well, Sara, I think this is the one that is the catch-all when we talk about self-awareness, and that is identifying emotions. Can you name what you're feeling? And I can say right now, and I'm doing it with a smile, I went a long time when I would feel anger and just say, I'm not angry, I'm just intense. I think that may be one of the big ones for a lot of us.
Yeah. Another way that this one comes out is we stay at the 3 big emotions, mad, sad, and glad, and we don't go any deeper than that. And so we never really get to the root of what the true feeling and emotion is that's there. And I would take it a step farther on, it's not just the emotions, it's what are the thoughts behind those emotions? If we wanted to have a coaching session here, Tim, I would say to you, so what was that anger really about that you didn't want to acknowledge it?
I was just thinking that same thing when you asked those questions about having the thoughts behind the emotions.
Because that helps us get to the root of why am I feeling that way? We're not going to go into any depth on this podcast, but I think you'll probably see a blog post come out this month about it. But the reactions that we have on Facebook, we read something that someone has posted, and whether they are a friend in real life or they are simply a Facebook friend, we react. Well, why are you reacting to it? Whether you respond in writing or not, I'm not even going there. I'm just saying that visceral reaction that we've all had scrolling through social media. You don't spend a ton of time on social media.
No, but what I do, if there's something that bothers me, and whether it's social media or something else, I've just learned this in recent years. I'll write something, but it doesn't ever get sent. It's a way of me being aware of my feelings, whatever it is that stirs up the anger, disgust, and what I've learned to ask myself is, and this is what we're talking about right now, what you were doing, is why do I feel that way? What is behind that?
Right.
And for me, and it's just because I've gotten to the place now where I feel more confident about it and can be vulnerable about it. But part of it is the way I was raised. And I'm not trying to give it all away to saying, oh, it was my mother's fault. But I am going to say that if I don't deal with those things in my life, I continue to react instead of respond. And that's part of what self-awareness is learning how to respond and not have a reaction of some kind.
Yeah. So let's go to the second one, because I want to come back to what you just said, Tim, of learning to react and not respond, and knowing what you need to do in those moments that you want to react, but you know you shouldn't. What do you need to do to take care of yourself so that you can continue to grow in your self-awareness as a leader? Let's do that at the end of the episode if we can. So what is the second aspect of self-awareness that we wanted to talk about? We've talked about identifying emotions and getting beyond that mad, sad, glad.
Well, it's having an accurate self-perception. I mean, do you know how your words and actions land on people, or how people take what you say or do?
So this is an interesting one. I can think of circumstances, and where my mind goes on this one a lot is as pastors and specifically as preachers. This one is really hard because in most of our congregations, and it's gotten even harder in the past year with video messages, the response of people, this is part of what I love about the African American church, is the call and response. You know right where people are at, and if there's no talk and no chatter, they're not responding and they're not connecting, and you know it. But as a pastor, someone's thoughtful face can also look like someone's angry face. Can also look like someone's completely disengaged face. A smile is much easier to interpret. So I'm going to set aside that exception of preaching, because when you're one speaking to many, this can often be hard because you're getting lots of different messages coming back at you at the same time. The place for me that this one came into recognition for me, it was in seminary, that one of my professors wrote on one of my papers, "Sara, you have a lot of good insights. I wish we heard more from you in class." Now, let's back up to the first thing that we said. I remember in that moment, and forgive me if this is a word that you don't like, I was pissed. And I had to ask myself, why are you getting all worked up about someone inviting you to speak up more in class? I mean, really. And for me, it's because my processing, when I am in a learning environment, let me write it down, let me think about it. I am not one that processes verbally. I'm one that processes by writing, by thinking about it, and having space in between that. So if we came back to that topic in class 2 weeks later, I would have something to say. But in that moment, I didn't. What I recognized from that professor is that my quiet nature, especially in groups, especially in meetings, people think that sometimes because I'm not speaking up, I don't have anything to say, or I'm disengaged. I had to come to understand that. So a couple of different ways that I've learned to deal with that is I will simply say to people, you probably won't hear a lot from me. That doesn't mean I'm not thinking. I speak when I have something to say, not simply to hear my voice. And I mean that genuinely, and I need you to accept that genuinely. I can't say that to everyone and every group of people and have them receive that. Part of what I have tried to model, because I find myself more on the facilitator role in the work that I do, is those quiet voices, including a pause in our time together to say, is anyone who has not spoken? And I'm clear about that. Has anyone who has not spoken, do you have anything that you would like to add? Or, Tim, I noticed that you haven't said anything yet. You don't have to. I just want to invite you if there's something that you would like to offer. Sometimes we can be in groups that are domineering, but notice what I did there. I didn't say, Tim, you've been quiet. What do you want to offer? Because now I've just voluntold him. And none of us like to be voluntold because he might not have anything to say in that moment, and that is okay. But I've offered an invitation to say, would you like to say something? And he can absolutely say, no, I've got nothing. I'm thinking, I've got my notes, but thanks. You acknowledge that person. That's part of what I've learned on the opposite side of it that I can do for others, because we all learn and process information in different ways. So that's something that I've had to come to understand about myself.
And so, Sara, I'm just the opposite. I process by talking, which I have learned is it's not bad. It's not good. It's not a value with that. It's just how I do it. But in a position of leadership, if you're processing with a group and you've not laid some kind of ground rules about what you're doing, sometimes what you say is taken seriously. And you may end up in a place you don't want to end up because somebody says, well, I can take care of that. Right. And that's not where you are at all.
Right.
So just being aware of how you process things, the people with whom you're processing, and making sure that when you're having those conversations, that you're actually having the conversation you want to have and you're not putting something else in motion.
So part of what I've come to understand about people that process verbally, and you're one of them, how I talk about it is verbal processors date their ideas. They don't get married to them. And so you might be having a conversation that goes in lots of different directions, but you're thinking it through. You're going on the date. You're trying to figure out, is this it? Is this it? Do we like this? And most of the time it's no, 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 no. But if you stopped somewhere back at date A and the person that you're speaking with who's processing verbally is already on to date F and you're married to date A, you get into trouble. And so again, it's the accurate self-perception and learning people and learning about people. Yeah. Number 3.
We do a lot of talking about this one, but this is really part of our self-awareness or any person's self-awareness, and that's just recognizing your strengths. What do you do really well, or do you do better than anyone else? And when you're saying that to yourself, you're not you're not putting yourself out above everybody else. You're not in some kind of competition. What you're doing is identifying your giftedness or your strength. It's out of those gifts or that strength that you're actually doing what you're doing, or you're being who you are. So, do you recognize your strengths? Sara, you do work with strengths. I'm sure you have an example of some kind.
Yeah, and this one does and doesn't relate to Clifton's strengths. And again, it's a personal example. When I took Clifton's strengths for the first time and saw that Maximizer was one of my top 5, I read the description and I went, yeah, that's me. And this goes back to 1 and 2, the identifying emotions and accurate self-perception as well. Part of what I've come to realize about that strength for me is that I am really good at either getting something started, because I can take it from nothing to being something. And the Maximizer strength, I call it the good to great strength. It's also the strength that loves strengths. And so I'm really good at either starting new things, getting things going so that they can come to a place. And then when I have reached the end of my abilities, then handing it off to someone else to say, here, you take it, because now it needs a refresh and I've poured everything into it that I can do. Or taking something that is already good and making it amazing. Do not ask me to do the ordinary, average, everyday work. I will go crazy. If you want average, if you want it just to get done, there's nothing in there for me that is a challenge of leveraging strengths, one, and utilizing my strengths that I can strategic, number one, think about, okay, if this is where we want to go, how are we going to get there? My achiever, okay, what are the steps that we need to take to get there? Okay, what does excellence look like in this area? Who are the people that I need around me to help make this happen? Learner, oh, what do I need to learn? Think about us starting this podcast. I didn't have a clue how to do a podcast. And there might have been something that I was even trying to learn as we were getting on to record this podcast today, to do our recording in a slightly different way. I'm always learning. So if you say to me, just keep it steady, there's nothing here, we don't need to improve. Maintaining for me is a version of hell on earth. I came to understand that. What I also came to understand is this Maximizer strength that helps me get things started, this Maximizer strength that helps me take things from good to great, this Maximizer strength that helps me focus on the strengths and partner so beautifully with all of my other strengths, can come off as perfection. Never being satisfied with what is happening. And I recognize that working with interns that, I was saying, okay, I would shift something on them because I was seeing an opportunity to make it better. And I had to recognize, Sara, you are going to absolutely positively wear them out when they are already working ridiculous hours and doing amazing work. If you don't stop continuing to want to improve something, because I saw one more way that it could be better. So I've had to come, again, going back to that accurate self-perception and identifying emotions, I had to come to the place to be able to ask myself the question. And I would say, honestly, I've really only done this part in the past 12 to 18 months. Is this good? Is it good enough? Does it need to be excellent? What does improving it accomplish? Because sometimes you just need to do B work. You don't always need to have the A++. That sounds ridiculous to some of you, but live in my skin for a few decades of always having to be A++. I had to recognize how both that strength was coming off on other people and the emotions that were associated with that, the go, 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 drive myself to sure exhaustion. Nothing healthy about that. And it's not being a good leader.
Well, I can tell that recognizing strengths is important to you.
Let's move on to the next one, because I think this is where, especially for Christian leaders, this next one can trip us up.
So the next one's possessing strong self-confidence.
Yeah. And so before you describe it, what I want you to think about, when you hear Tim say possessing strong self-confidence, and you just heard what I did and how I described strengths, there was some self-confidence there for me to be able to articulate, here's what I'm good at, these are my strengths, here's how they play out, and oh crap, this is how it can also land on people. I have to have enough self-confidence to be able to name that and also not get tripped up by that or force it on to other people.
So we talk about a balance, or it could also be humility. It could also be graciousness, but it's at least knowing yourself well enough where you might go off the rails.
Yeah.
I can only talk about it from if I'm a part of a group that I don't think is going to make a whole lot of difference, I can check out pretty quickly, because if I understand my strengths of strategic, futuristic, and self-assurance, I can pretty well see where we need to go and get us there. And if you don't want to go, well, I'm probably not worth much of my time. That's on the negative side. So yes, there's a place where you have the self-confidence to step in and do what needs to be done, but that's balanced out with, as we've already said, with humility, with an emotional balance. It doesn't have to go your way all the time. You're okay. Maybe that's not what you were looking for.
No, I think that's a great example. Possessing a strong self-confidence, yeah, there is some ego that's involved in that. But if it's not checked with that humility, you're going to come off pretty arrogant. And it's not going to come across as self-confidence. It's going to come across in a negative way as arrogance.
So I agree with you. So part of what, as we talk about self-awareness, part of what we have to understand, or what I think I need to understand and want people to hear about a strong self-confidence, that's not contradictory to who we are as Jesus followers or as leaders in the church. Sometimes we feel like that humility is not having that self-confidence. And that's not what we're talking about.
No, I would say that if you have humility and have no self-confidence, or the term I've used is ego, people steamroll over you. You don't have opinions. You don't take a stand. There's not a firm foundation underneath you.
And what I've learned, Sara, when that happens, there's some place where if I'm that person, there's some place where I have to release all of the frustration and anger and even disappointment with myself. And that oftentimes ends up with family or with people that we don't particularly want to hurt. I sometimes think of it that if we're not dealing with these things in a healthy way, and in terms of self-awareness, it's kind of like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. You can for a while, but after a while it'll pop up somewhere. And really, all this stuff that you've suppressed because you've not been healthy in that self-confidence or humility, or it actually comes out in a negative way on someone that you didn't necessarily intend it to come out on.
Yeah. Yes, that's a good reminder. So, Tim, the last element of self-awareness that we wanted to talk about today is what?
Possessing self-efficacy.
And what's that all about?
Well, from my perspective, again, we're talking about having a healthy confidence. And I use the word healthy in that because, again, it's being able to be so aware of our emotions and our perceptions and strengths that we actually, from my perspective, actually know what I can accomplish, know what I'm able to do. But I do that in relationship with other people. So it's not that I'm doing anything in terms of who I am or my motivation to get what I want or to manipulate something. I've got to be able to use my gifts, strengths, and who I am in relationship to the gifts and strengths of the people around me. A few weeks ago, we inaugurated a new president. He'd been vice president of the United States. He'd been a United States senator all of his adult life, practically. He's been in Washington, D.C. But I heard him say, and that would be enough confidence right there to do anything. He's probably, this is not a political statement, it's just based upon his experience. He's probably the most qualified person to be president that we've ever had in history. But I heard him say, after a couple of days on the job, I didn't realize it was like this. I mean, he's an insider. That's what we would call an insider. And we would think that he would know everything there would be to know. But what he has said is, even with all that he knows, it's different after you get there. And I think that's part of what any leader needs to understand. And maybe this is the learner part of my strengths. But there's no one of us that knows all that we need to know. That we can have the confidence and what I've learned is that a lot of people move forward with what looks like confidence because they don't know what they're doing. And I've also learned that when people are in leadership positions and they don't know what they're doing, they're also going to try to micromanage. So they're not doing this in relationship to the people around them. They're trying to control something they can't control. And so there's a part of this that I do know what I can do, but there's a place for me to grow and to know and to learn what I don't know so that I can best use or be related to the gifts and the strengths of the people around me. Does that make sense? That's part of what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, and I'm going to go back to your example of President Biden. I'm thinking about a clip that I saw of the previous presidents. And one of them, I don't remember who it was, it might have been President Bush, said something along the lines of, we're the people who understand the role that you're going to be in. There's only a few who do. What I'm hearing you say about this one in particular is you know what you can do and what you're capable of doing, and you also know and can articulate, here's where I need help. And the only thing that I would add to that is knowing you need help and asking for help are two different things. And I think people who have self-efficacy take that step of asking for help. I think that's an important part of the self-efficacy.
That's a healthy self-awareness. And that's when we talk about self-awareness, it's things like that. I think we grow into it, but it's things like that that actually help us be courageous leaders, because it's not courageous. This is my opinion, my biased opinion. It's not courageous to think you can do it on your own.
Well, and it's not courageous to think that you have to. I think it's the Gallup when they talk about needs of followers.
Yes, Gallup.
The number one thing that people point to in terms of leaders that they're willing to follow is when a leader asks for help from their team. People don't expect a leader to have all of the answers and to know everything. And it's when you go to your team, when you go to your people and say, can you help me with this? Not only are you recognizing their strengths, are you giving them a boost in their confidence and helping them to step into something, but they're also seeing you in a way that, oh, look, we are in this together and there is a relationship that's there. Before we end this episode, Tim, at the very beginning, pointed to something that you recognized in yourself and started to recognize in yourself that helped you to hit the pause button. So as a takeaway for our listeners, you want to reframe that again to help them think about it, given the 5 different aspects of what we've talked about in terms of self-awareness. What would you remind folks of?
What I've learned I need to do in terms of response is I can write something and then not ever send it. I can ask myself why I feel the way I feel, or I want to react the way I react, and then get back balanced so I can do it in a healthy kind of way. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to respond, but it does mean that I am going to respond and not react if that's the case. And I'm going to do it in a healthy way. And part of what I've learned, and I think this is what you're getting at, and that is when we react, we tend to, I'm going to say it this way, I think we tend to go to the least common place that we can go. And so what we're really doing is looking at the most negative piece that we can look at. And what for me is more healthy is that, and what I've learned from you and Brene Brown is how can I be more generous with the people with whom I'm reacting. And so it comes to a place of just, for me, if I'm a follower of Jesus and I want everybody to be a follower of Jesus, then how am I going to model that love and care for the people, even though I may be angry, even though I may be hurt, even though I may have something to say about all that stuff that's being said? Is that what's really needing to be said? Or is it some way in which I can express the love of God in a way that redirects all of that? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, it is. And what I would say to bring all of this together is we react out of what I call our squirrel brain. It's the part of our brain that we fight. It's fight, flight, or freeze. We're trying to protect ourselves. That's where we react from. The response that you're talking about is the higher thinking skills and processing skills that we have as human beings. And that takes literally time for us to let go of that, let the hormones in our body that have said, fight, flight, freeze, your safety is in jeopardy here. No, we don't literally say that, but that's what's happening in our body. We've got to get past that to be able to get to the place to say, okay, what's the most generous interpretation that I can make here? And how can I respond to this in a way that is helpful, that is Christ-like, that is kind, that asks a question instead of makes an accusation? And for each one of us, that thing is going to be different. And what I would say to you is, know what your thing is. Tim writes. Sometimes I will write, but the question I've learned to ask myself when I am reacting, the first question for me is, am I tired or am I hungry? And I ask that question because I most often overreact when I'm in one of those two states. And if I'm not tired or hungry, okay, why are you reacting? Do I need to get outside? Do I need to move? Have I been sitting at my desk too long? Those sound like silly questions, but for me, that's what I've learned. Those are the places that I react because I've been doing one thing for too long of a period of time. And then I have to get perspective. And that goes back to the higher thinking thing. And the question that I ask around that one is, what will I think about this in a week, a month, or a year? And that's where my brain goes on social media of people that spend an inordinate amount of time trying to argue on social media. You're not even going to remember that conversation even happened. So why are you doing it?
So it's one of the things I've woven into all of that, Sara, and we've talked about this on podcasts, and it matters where you start. And so on social media, no one starts with the love of God. I mean, I can just say that. So everybody starts with some position somewhere, and you're not going to convince people of your position by arguing with them back and forth, because that's not what social media is set up to do.
It's all squirrel brain stuff.
Right.
It is inviting a reaction. My whole point in walking through that and even bringing up social media is know what your questions are. Tim gave you his response and what he does. I've given you a couple of ways that I ask myself and help myself to be able to walk through that. And those are all ways of growing in self-awareness, especially as a leader. And so we all need those things that help us to respond and not to react so that we can lead well. Any last minute words of advice, wisdom?
Sara, I'm self-aware enough to know that we've gone long enough and it's time to move on. Grateful for people that listen, and hope these become the kind of insights and resources you need to be the kind of leader God's created you to be.
Amen. Well, let me just end by reminding you already have your takeaway. You already have your question for reflection. And that's, what are the questions that you need to ask yourself, or what is the thing that you need to do so that you can respond and not react and continue growing in your self-awareness. If you didn't hear us say that, now you did. And let me remind you that you can find show notes for this episode at transformingmission.org/podcast. You're looking for episode 167, or you can go directly to this episode at transformingmission.org/167. And remember, who you are is how you lead. Bye for now.